Todos estos casos parecen maravillosos, parece que hace fácil este proceso de innovar o crear una solución maravillosa que de repente vas a ser el siguiente Airbnb. Ojalá que fuera así, porque creo que sí que hay espacio para que todos tengamos ideas maravillosas que se extienden. Pero es perfecto este sistema, vale para todo. Hemos visto que hay momentos en que necesitamos pensamiento analítico o pensamiento de diseño. También hay críticas sobre el proceso de design thinking o este boom de design thinking que estamos viviendo ahora. La transparencia, la humildad, son la capacidad de escuchar. Hemos visto que son habilidades necesarias para practicar el design thinking. Y por eso quiero compartir, y creo que es importante, que escucháis este vídeo de Natasha Jen criticando el design thinking. Dice que no vale nada, básicamente. Vamos a escucharlo y luego nos veremos después de ello.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about design thinking today. I'm a designer. I'm a practicing, I would say, graphic designer. That's still the term that I would like to use to describe myself, although our practice is extremely wide, going from brand identity design to exhibition, to publication, to motion, so on and so forth. So we have been living with this term, design thinking, in our everyday life for a while now, and it has become such a buzzword. And that is my precise problem with design thinking in today's society, and particularly in design community right now, is a kind of complete lack of criticism on it. And I think that as somebody who like myself, really cares about what we put out in the world, I think that we gotta take a step back and really kind of look at what we mean by design thinking and what it does to our world and to ourselves. Okay, so if you Google design thinking and go to the image area, this is pretty much what you will see. So this was found in May 1st, 2017, last month. You know, as you can see, that it's typically visualized and represented as 5 somehow hexagons. I don't know why hexagons. So typically 5 steps, right? And they go linearly. Okay, so now let's look at the steps. Okay, so the 5 steps are empathize, which we all know that we gotta, understand the users, their needs, so on and so forth, and be very sympathetic to the situation that they're in. And then we really gotta define the parameter, right? And then with the parameter defined, we ideate, we come up with concepts, and then we have to prototype very quickly to realize these concepts, and then test the prototypes with the users. Sounds all really reasonable, right? And I'm sure a lot of practice design or design thinking through this very linear particular methodology. But take a pause, okay? Think about what is really lacking here when you present something to, meaning design, to your colleagues, to people. The first thing that people would react to is what I call crit. So crit is completely missing from this process. What is design crit? What is design criticism? For those who have gone to design school, you know how important that is in every step of the design, every discussion. You bring forth an idea, you bring forth an evidence, and then everybody crit the heck out of it. And that's when you can make improvement. That's when you can begin to really evaluate if something is valuable, is good at all. But I think that this critical step of evaluating whether something is good or not is completely missing in today's design thinking conversation. And then my second problem is that design is now reduced to a single tool that is called 3M Post-its. And you're probably pretty familiar with these images. Seriously, go type in design thinking, and you will see these are the images that come up in Google. And that is really telling, And that I think is highly problematic because, as you know, the world that we're in right now is messy and it's beautiful, it's inspiring, it's with a lot of stuff. And then there are many ways, tools too, to use to actually create and think about design. And why do we end up with a single medium here right now? And that's something I really hope someone can explain to me. So here's sort of my definition of design thinking. That is design thinking right now, okay, not as a pedagogy, but right now, it packages the designer's way of working for non-designer audience by codifying their processes into a prescriptive step-by-step approach to creative problem solving, claiming that it can be applied by anyone to any problems. Okay, so that I think is highly, highly problematic. But what is even more problematic is that I haven't heard a voice or much voice from the design community to actually try to reshape this conversation. So we gotta look back to how design thinking came about. You know, again, this is by no means an in-depth study, but really a way to try to help myself and my team to understand where it came about, you know, from the pedagogical point of view. So it was first, you know, kind of presented as design as a way of thinking by a scientist named Herbert Simon, as well as an engineer, Robert McKim, who wrote a really wonderful book that's called Experiences in Visual Thinking. You can still find it on Amazon. It's really wonderful. It basically describes how visual evidence is so critical in creative thinking. And then an architect named Brian Lawson began to kind of apply design thinking into architecture practice. And then a journalist, his name is Nigel Prose, wrote an article that advocated bringing design as a way of thinking or design thinking into education to actually talk to a broader audience. And another architect and urban planner, Peter Rowe, who taught at Harvard, he first to kind of really use the term design thinking very significantly in his book titled Design Thinking. And then Rolf Fast, who was a professor at Stanford, began to actually really put it into a curriculum. And then after that, David Kelly, who we know from IDEO, he was the sort of the first one, I think, in the public record who began to apply it into business, you know, courses. And then there's Richard Buchanan, who began to kind of address human concerns through design. He was really the one who talked very extensively about very fundamental human needs in design. So let's look at this one, the OXO grip, good grips. We're all really familiar with these products. What's really interesting about this as a kind of example on design thinking is that, first of all, you see that there are many, many, many levels of iterations through this. This is something that's as simple as a vegetable peel. But what I did was that they began to kind of really understand certain extreme use cases from everyday people like you and I to athletes who are really, really strong, to people who have arthritis, so that, you know, the grip and the shape and the material became extremely important. But what's interesting here is that you see that there are tangible evidence that we can actually look at and begin to critique whether the thinking behind it is good or not. And then we can actually iterate and improve upon it. I think the idea of improvement is really, really important and demonstrated in this image. But then the problem with design thinking as a diagram is that you really cannot understand what is the outcome of it. And without an outcome, you cannot critique how good it is. So design thinking started out really as a kind of very important, I think, methodology for industrial design. But in recent years, you know, I think that it has become this kind of thing where other adjacent design fields began to opportunistically began to latching onto in order to fulfill their own needs. That's a problem. So how's it going today? Let's look at some examples. So here you see that there's this MRI scan for children by GE. And allegedly, this project, as you see, that there are a lot of murals with tigers, you know, on the wall. This result was done through design thinking. So now just take a pause and think that MRI scan for children, let's put, you know, cartoons on the wall. Do you really need design thinking to actually do that? Isn't that a little bit obvious? Next example. So Okay, let's talk about target markets and users. So oil of Olay is a very well-known legendary skincare product, and they started to lose market share in the elderly women market, and then they decided to kind of just take it down to a slightly younger generation, in women in their 30s and 40s. Again, that itself is a pretty obvious thing, and you don't really need this kind of 5-step design thinking process in order to accomplish that. That itself is human intuition. Next one, this interface done by IBM. Okay, so allegedly this, I think it's a portal. It was also created through a really rigorous design thinking process. But then if you look at the result, I have to say this is pretty similar to a lot of portals that I have seen in my life. So what? So what is design thinking? So, and these are the words now. They're associated with design thinking. I'm not going to read through each of them, but you may kind of find some of these are really just ridiculous, really. As real designers, we really don't use these terms to describe our work. We use really, really, I think, hard and, tangible words to describe, to critique our work. None of these words are real criticism on anything. They're buzzwords. So to sound like corporate jargon, right? So what happens to design? So I think that in today's world right now, I think design has become this box where people just want to check off, and that's a problem. And I think as designers, or anybody who has anything to do with design, we gotta be really critical of it. And also, let's look at how design was done before design thinking came about. First of all, Charles and Ray Eames, as you can see, the complete lack of 3M stickies on their mood board, right? So they really practice learning by doing, really by doing so, they learn how to define the needs and constraints of every project before designing. And they were one of the most prolific designers, in our time ever. And Steve Jobs, again, look at his home office, really messy. And he also applied his way of design thinking, which is intuition, by really focusing on people's desires, and needs rather than business needs, right? So by doing so, he actually created some of the most iconic and cultural shifting products ever. This is an image of Pentagram, and as you can see, it's a pretty messy office. It's me sitting there with Paula talking about design. And as you can see that we have a wall of our work. We want to exhibit our work to remind ourselves where the standard is, where we have been, and also to use the opportunity to actually self-critique and kind of, use that to make us work better. Again, there's evidence right there. And this is a wall of a model wall of a really renowned architecture firm called OMA. As you can see, these blue foams, they don't look really interesting, but they're actually the predecessors of all the amazing architecture that OMA have built so far. So as you can see that these are all evidence that we can critique on and improve on. So what I think, what I still truly believe is that real designers surround themselves with evidence. You really gotta have the evidence, and you gotta have the grit in order to make the world better. So look at this environment. This is a kind of very typical designer's environment. Again, messy evidence is not this kind of 5-step linear hexagon-based process. So my challenge to design thinking practitioners is to really share the evidence and the result and the outcome that you have produced, and allow us to credit and to comment on it, and to really kind of see where we can go from design thinking. Thank you.
¿Qué os ha parecido la crítica de Natasha Jen? Ha sido bastante cañera, como se dice. Tiene unos puntos importantes, es decir, incluso ella misma critica el ejemplo de Doug Diez de los MRIs de los niños. Pero no se trató solo de pintar las paredes de un color, Se trató de entender qué importaba a las personas y cómo podías empezar la experiencia de la interacción con un elemento desde mucho antes de empezar a interactuar con ello. Recordar que hemos dicho la experiencia de cliente es muy importante y por eso cuando diseñamos un producto o un servicio estamos diseñando un producto cuya experiencia empieza antes que nuestros clientes o nuestra persona target empieza a interactuar con lo que estamos diseñando. También es importante tener en cuenta las perspectivas de las personas que rodean esas personas que queremos alcanzar. Pensamos un momento, ¿qué veis en esta imagen? Muchos pensaréis en algo a lo mejor negativo o tabú. Y eso es exactamente lo que pasó. Esto es un jeringue que se usaba para los que tienen diabetes para ponerse la insulina. Lo que pasa es que había muchos tabús o se sentían, por el diseño del elemento, se sentían cohibidos y no estaban motivados a usarlo, sobre todo en público. Y por eso cuando hablamos de Design Thinking, no solo de crear un envase nuevo bonito, entendemos, para llegar a ese envase, a ese diseño, hace falta entender, hay que escuchar y hay que conectar con las personas. Eso es lo que llegó a este nuevo diseño del jeringue para la insulina, del Latness Solo Star. Y la verdad es que creo que nadie tendrá miedo o vergüenza de usar algo así. Así que el Design Thinking sí que nos puede llevar a crear nuevas soluciones y productos que tengan impacto real y de valor para las personas. ¿Qué diría Natasha? Diría Natasha, he entendido tu crítica, es importante, sí. Y creo que cuando hablamos de Design Thinking tal vez no hablamos suficiente de retroalimentación, el feedback que necesitamos buscar o las críticas que tenemos que buscar realmente activamente sobre nuestros productos, porque claro, en nuestra mente nuestras ideas son maravillosas, pero nos tenemos que enfrentar a que la gente se critica lo que estamos diciendo porque buscamos precisamente esa pluralidad de visión. Si os acordáis, hemos visto cuándo se aplica Design Thinking, cuándo se necesita a llegar a un público diverso. Así que el Design Thinking es un guía para llegar a esa solución innovadora. Es importante siempre tener en cuenta de pensar en plural y tener en cuenta las perspectivas de los demás. Vamos allá.